Counting or not counting gang violence?
Oh my God.
Go, run!
A shocking tragedy has shaken America. Conservative activist Charlie Kirk was assassinated in front of a live audience. How did this happen? And what does it mean for the future of free speech and politics in America? Tonight, we'll walk you through the chilling timeline, the unanswered questions, and the legacy Kirk leaves behind. It was supposed to be a simple debate. Students packed into Utah Valley University's auditorium, buzzing with energy as Charlie Kirk took the stage. At just 31, Kirk had become one of the most recognizable conservative voices in America. For some, he was a hero of free speech. For others, a lightning rod of controversy. But that day, politics was the last thing on people's minds. They came to hear a debate, not witness a nightmare. The crowd was locked in as Kirk fielded tough questions, his trademark confidence on display. Then, without warning, a sharp crack split the air. At first, some thought it was a mic glitch or a prop falling, but the truth became clear in seconds. It wasn't feedback. It wasn't an accident. It was a gunshot. It was supposed to be a simple debate. Students packed into Utah Valley University's auditorium, buzzing with energy as Charlie Kirk took the stage. At just 31, Kirk had become one of the most recognizable conservative voices in America. For some, he was a hero of free speech. For others, a lightning rod of controversy. But that day, politics was the last thing on people's minds. They came to hear a debate, not witness a nightmare. The crowd was locked in as Kirk fielded tough questions, his trademark confidence on display. Then, without warning, a sharp crack split the air. At first, some thought it was a mic glitch or a prop falling, but the truth became clear in seconds. It wasn't feedback. It wasn't an accident. It was a gunshot. Panic erupted. The audience gasped, ducked, and scattered. Students threw themselves under chairs, clutching backpacks as makeshift shields. Others bolted for the exits, terrified of being trampled in the stampede. Witnesses say Kirk jolted violently in his chair, the shock on his face freezing the room in silence before chaos swallowed the scene. One student later recalled, "I was 15 feet away. It was hard to process. People screamed, others froze. I thought I'd be the next target." Another witness described the sheer confusion. "I stayed up a little bit because I wanted to see who did it, but I saw nothing, just people running everywhere. It was pure fear." The sound of that single shot was enough to shatter the calm, and as people scrambled for cover, nobody knew how many attackers there were, or if more violence was coming. In those frantic moments, survival was the only thought. But the chaos inside the auditorium was only the beginning. Within minutes, the auditorium was swarming with authorities. Campus police stormed in, shouting commands, trying to regain control. Students pressed against the walls, some crying, others whispering prayers under their breath. No one knew if the shooter was still inside. Officers quickly detained one man near the scene. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was he the shooter? Were there more? But just hours later, officials confirmed that the first suspect had been released. He wasn't the killer. Instead, he was charged with obstruction, a confusing twist that only deepened the fear and speculation. Meanwhile, ambulances rushed to the scene. Paramedics pushed through the panicked crowd, navigating spilled drinks, backpacks, and overturned chairs to reach the stage. But by then, it was too late. News soon broke that Charlie Kirk had not survived. For those who were inside, the shock lingered. One student described the terrifying silence that followed the shot. "I hit the ground, covering my head. For a second, I thought I'd never get back up. The sound kept ringing in my ears. I'll never forget it." The fear rippled outward. Parents flooded phone lines, desperate to hear from their children. Social media exploded with rumors. Multiple shooters, more attacks, a coordinated strike. None of it was confirmed, but panic spread faster than facts. Law enforcement urged calm, but the sight of heavily armed officers patrolling the campus only fueled the sense of dread. For many students, the university they once thought of as safe had become a crime scene overnight. And yet, even as investigators searched for answers, another story was beginning to unfold. One of grief, remembrance, and a nation trying to make sense of what had just happened. But that wasn't the end of it, because outside the crime scene, emotions were rising, and people across the country were preparing to mourn. As night fell, the chaos of the shooting gave way to something quieter, but no less powerful. Across Utah and Arizona, people began gathering, holding candles, leaving flowers and whispering prayers for a man who had just hours earlier been standing tall on a stage. At Turning Point USA's headquarters in Phoenix, mourners built a growing memorial outside the doors. Handwritten notes, Bibles, and American flags lined the pavement. Some stayed in silence, heads bowed. Others wept openly, struggling to comprehend how a voice they had followed for years could be silenced so suddenly. One woman at the vigil admitted through tears, "We didn't always agree with everything Charlie said, but he was fearless. He believed in something bigger than himself, and that deserves respect." It wasn't just political allies who showed up. Churches across Arizona opened their doors for prayer services. At Dream City Church, where Kirk had partnered on events, pastors spoke about his passion for faith and freedom. In Scottsdale, Catholics for Catholics gathered to pray the rosary, describing Kirk as a man who never failed to share scripture with friends and strangers alike. One organizer recalled receiving early morning texts from Kirk. "He'd send me a Bible verse at 7 a.m. every day. That's just who he was." Even in smaller towns, spontaneous gatherings appeared. In Gilbert, Arizona, dozens of young people lit candles in the town square, holding up signs that read, "Free speech matters," and "Gone too soon." Online, tributes flooded in by the millions. Hashtags bearing Kirk's name trended across social media platforms. Supporters shared clips of his fiery campus debates, while critics, though often at odds with him, admitted that no one deserved to be silenced in such a brutal way. By the next morning, the weight of the tragedy stretched far beyond politics. For many, the shooting wasn't just about Charlie Kirk. It was about what his death symbolized. If a debate at a university could end in bloodshed, what did that mean for the future of civil discourse in America? And while mourners lit candles in the dark, anger began to grow. Political leaders were preparing statements. The media was demanding answers. And the nation was about to learn that this tragedy was being described as something far more dangerous than just an isolated act of violence. By sunrise, grief had turned into outrage. Leaders across the political spectrum began weighing in, and the language they used made one thing clear. This wasn't being treated as just another shooting. Utah's Republican governor called it exactly what many feared: a political assassination. Those words echoed across news outlets, fueling a storm of debate about what had really happened on that stage in Orem. In Arizona, Governor Katie Hobbs, a Democrat often at odds with Kirk's politics, ordered all flags on state buildings lowered to half-mast. Her statement struck a somber tone. "I am saddened for our country as our politics have descended into horrific violence." Former astronaut and U.S. Senator Mark Kelly echoed that sentiment, warning that Kirk had lost his life because someone thought violence was the answer to political disagreement. Then came Gabby Giffords, the former Arizona congresswoman who had survived a similar attack over a decade ago. Her words carried the weight of lived trauma. "Attacks against political or ideological opponents are cowardly and un-American. They must be universally condemned." But perhaps the most emotional reaction came from former President Donald Trump, who had long championed Kirk's work with Turning Point USA. On Truth Social, Trump wrote, "The great and even legendary Charlie Kirk is dead. No one understood or had the heart of the youth better than Charlie. He was loved and admired by all, especially me. Even those who had fiercely disagreed with Kirk's ideas found themselves shaken." Political analysts noted how rare it was to see such bipartisan grief, calling it a chilling reminder that violence doesn't care about party lines. But not everyone stopped at mourning. Some saw Kirk's death as proof that America's political climate had spiraled into dangerous territory. Commentators warned that debate and disagreement, the very foundations of democracy, were being replaced with threats, intimidation, and bloodshed. And as these warnings grew louder, another uncomfortable truth came into focus. Charlie Kirk's assassination wasn't an isolated act. It was part of a disturbing pattern of political violence spreading across the country. Charlie Kirk's assassination didn't happen in a vacuum. It arrived in the middle of a disturbing trend, one that has been escalating for years. Just over a year earlier, America had witnessed multiple assassination attempts on former President Donald Trump, one during a campaign rally, another while he was golfing. Both incidents sent shockwaves through the political world, but they weren't the only ones. In June, a Democratic state lawmaker in Minnesota and her husband were murdered in what authorities described as a politically motivated attack. Not long after, a Colorado parade was firebombed during a demonstration calling for the release of hostages in Gaza. Even the home of Pennsylvania's governor, who was Jewish, was set ablaze in an act federal officials labeled as extremist-driven. Arizona itself has felt the sting. A Democratic campaign office in Tempe was shot up twice in a single year. Nationally, threats against members of Congress have skyrocketed, forcing many lawmakers to increase their security. Experts warn that the United States is sliding into a dangerous new reality, where political violence isn't just possible, but expected. Daniel Hernandez, who famously helped save Gabby Giffords during the 2011 Tucson shooting, put it bluntly, "This is not normal. This is not okay, and we cannot allow it to keep happening." Political scientists say that what makes Kirk's killing especially alarming is where it happened: a university campus, a place meant for debate, dialogue, and the exchange of ideas. If even a discussion about politics can end with a bullet, what does that mean for the future of free speech? Groups like the Arizona Democracy Resilience Network have been sounding the alarm, warning that when people stop seeing their opponents as fellow citizens and start viewing them as enemies, violence becomes easier to justify. Former Arizona Senator Jeff Flake issued his own warning. "We need to realize that we can disagree with each other and still not count each other as evil. Because when you do that, you make some people feel justified in violence." For many, Kirk's assassination was the latest, and perhaps clearest, sign that America's divisions have reached a breaking point. But while the violence raises fear for the future, it also raises another question. Who exactly was Charlie Kirk? And how did a young activist from Illinois rise to become one of the most influential voices of his generation? Long before his name made national headlines, Charlie Kirk was just a teenager with a restless energy and a sharp political instinct. While most high school seniors were thinking about prom or college applications, Kirk was focused on something very different: changing the conversation about politics among America's youth. At just 18, he founded Turning Point USA, a grassroots organization that would soon explode into one of the most powerful conservative movements in the country. What started as a small project with a handful of volunteers grew rapidly, fueled by Kirk's relentless drive and ability to connect with young audiences. He saw something others missed: that America's college campuses had become battlegrounds for ideas. While many conservatives avoided them, Kirk leaned in. He built a reputation for showing up at universities across the country, standing toe-to-toe with students who opposed him, and sparking fiery debates in packed lecture halls. These weren't quiet discussions. They were confrontations that went viral, shared millions of times online. Supporters loved his unapologetic confidence. Critics accused him of seeking spectacle. Either way, people were watching, and Kirk's name was spreading far beyond the walls of academia. By his 20s, he wasn't just a campus activist anymore. He was an author, a speaker, and the host of a daily 3-hour radio show. His reach expanded into television, social media, and eventually the political stage itself. Turning Point USA became more than just a youth movement. With chapters on over 850 college campuses, it grew into a nationwide operation with conferences, rallies, and direct ties to Republican leadership. Kirk positioned himself not only as a voice for young conservatives, but as a bridge between the grassroots and the political elite. Perhaps most importantly, he built a strong relationship with Donald Trump. Turning Point hosted rallies that boosted Trump's campaigns, and Kirk became one of the former president's most visible defenders. His ability to mobilize young voters gave him influence far beyond his years. Supporters described him as tireless, often working around the clock, traveling, speaking, and strategizing. To them, he was proof that one determined individual could reshape the future of politics. But while his rise was meteoric, it was also deeply polarizing. For every young conservative who saw him as a mentor, there were critics who accused him of fueling division. And it was that sharp edge, his willingness to confront the culture wars head-on, that would make him one of the most controversial figures in modern American politics. And as his influence grew, so did the backlash. Charlie Kirk was never someone who tried to please everyone. In fact, he seemed to thrive on controversy. To his supporters, he was bold, unafraid to speak truths that others avoided. To his critics, he was divisive, a provocateur who pushed culture wars to the extreme. From the start, Kirk positioned himself in the middle of America's most heated debates. Whether it was immigration, religion in schools, or gender issues, he rarely softened his tone. Instead, he leaned in, using sharp rhetoric and viral moments to capture attention. This unapologetic style made him a hero to many conservatives, especially younger ones who felt ignored by traditional politics. But with the fame came fierce backlash. Progressive groups accused him of spreading misinformation and deepening political divides. University events often sparked protests, sometimes so heated that police were called to keep order. For every student who lined up to take a selfie with him, there was another chanting for his removal. Yet Kirk seemed unfazed. He once said that confrontation wasn't something to avoid. It was proof that the conversation mattered. And in a media landscape driven by clicks, conflict became a powerful tool. Every viral video, every fiery debate, every controversial soundbite built his following larger and louder. Turning Point USA mirrored that same growth. What began as a student organization soon expanded into a national powerhouse, hosting massive conferences that drew in high-profile Republican leaders. The group shifted from focusing only on youth to mobilizing conservatives of all ages. Some political analysts even argued that without Turning Point, Donald Trump might not have built the same momentum in his campaigns. This visibility, however, also made Kirk a target. Opponents labeled him a symbol of toxic partisanship. Supporters saw him as a warrior willing to endure criticism to defend what he believed. The sharp divide around his name reflected the larger fractures in American politics itself. Love him or loathe him, one thing was undeniable. Charlie Kirk had become one of the most influential conservative figures of his generation. And now, with his life cut short at just 31, the question that remains is what his death will mean for the future of politics in America. The assassination of Charlie Kirk is more than the loss of a single life. It's a reflection of where America stands today. A nation struggling with division, anger, and the dangerous rise of political violence. At just 31 years old, Kirk's story ended on a university stage, a place meant for debate and free speech. The symbolism of that moment is hard to ignore. It forces the question, if even dialogue is no longer safe, what does that mean for the future of democracy? For supporters, Kirk's death is a devastating blow. They see it as the silencing of a powerful voice who inspired young conservatives and gave them a platform. For critics, even those who opposed his views, the violence is a sobering reminder that differences should never be settled with bullets. Across the political spectrum, one truth emerges. No democracy can survive if violence becomes the language of politics. Whether it was the shooting of Gabby Giffords, the assassination attempts on Donald Trump, or now the murder of Charlie Kirk, each act chips away at the foundations of civil society. History will remember Charlie Kirk as both influential and polarizing. A man who built a movement, sparked countless debates, and reshaped how politics reached America's youth. But the way his life ended may leave an even deeper mark, becoming a warning of what happens when disagreement turns into dehumanization. As the nation mourns, the responsibility now falls on leaders, communities, and ordinary citizens to choose a different path. To prove that ideas can be fought with ideas, not violence. To protect the spaces where debate, not destruction, shapes the future. Charlie Kirk's death is a tragedy, but if it sparks a reckoning with the culture of division and hatred that fueled it, perhaps it won't be in vain.